Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and get started with the last panel, which in some ways tries to re-ground all of the discussions in the context of some of the most vulnerable workers for whom these all three pillars of a retirement savings system should ideally work in service of helping them build retirement security. And we're really fortunate today to have just incredible perspective, both from Canada and from here in the US, on the implications of both the Canadian reforms and Canadian system ideas and their impact on low and moderate income workers, and also some of the ideas and some of the reality of what that looks like here in the US. And then we'll have a bit of an interplay between our speakers about what can we draw from Canada, and also how do we not put something that's happening in some other country on a pedestal and think that everything's better someplace else, but really grapple with some of the ways that we actually have some advantages and options in the US if we have the political will to work with them to actually do even more for low and moderate income workers in terms of retirement security. So I'm going to just quickly, we'll go across the board here. We'll start with Jonathan Weisstab, who's one of the founding partners of Commonwealth, and I know you have full bios, so I don't want to spend a lot of time with that, but a lot of experience both in the public and private sector on these issues, and you're going to share with us a bit of the work. And then we're going to Catherine Harvey, who's a senior policy research analyst from AARP at the Public Policy Institute. Catherine's been doing a lot of work, both with the innovations in the product side and also in terms of some of the policy work that's been happening at the state levels. And we'll ask Mark Avery to round us out with, in terms of an initial set of remarks. And Mark is here at the Brookings Institution as a non-resident senior fellow in economic studies. And I probably should have introduced myself. I'm Ida Rademacher, and I lead the financial security program at the Aspen Institute. And it's a pleasure to be here for this conversation. So Jonathan, why don't we have you go ahead and start? I know you have some slides to put up. And we'll use your last slide later on. Whoever's managing AV, we might pull the last slide up later on in the discussion.
It's an incredible screen.
It's an incredible screen.
It's an incredible screen. Okay, so...
But those aren't your slides.
No, they're not. They're not. We could look at them, but they're not my slides. That's the beginning of the slide. Okay, so thanks, Ida. So I wanted to start by thanking all of you for sticking with us. It's been a long session on retirement security, and I appreciate that you're all still here. So I'm going to actually burst your bubble a bit in talking about Canada. It turns out we don't actually live in a perfect social democracy. May come as a shock to all of you. Today I'm going to talk about how low and moderate income Canadians fare in retirement and why innovation is necessary to address their needs. So people look to Canada as a model often on world-class pension plans and as a country that prides itself on the protection of the vulnerable. And while there are elements of truth to this, as it relates to lower and moderate income earners, Canada actually is, unfortunately, failing a bit. So the first slide is on seniors poverty, and you'll see, because, I mean, we're talking about retirement security, we might as well talk about how well our system is doing for seniors. You'll see on the left that we've had a very good reduction in seniors poverty. On the right, you'll see the public programs that have actually driven that decline in seniors poverty, and that some of them were talked about before. Our benefit system is made up of a few different programs. Old age security, which is a monthly social security payment available to most Canadians 65 and older with individual income of less than $114,000. The maximum monthly payment is about $583. We heard some of these numbers actually I think earlier from Hassan. We also have something called the Guaranteed Income Supplement. This program was designed for seniors with lower incomes and provides up to $875 a month. And of course, the Canada Pension Plan, the recent enhancement of which Hassan talked about earlier, which was obviously a very significant achievement. So it's true that government benefits have been pretty successful in creating a minimum standard that keeps most seniors out of the technical definition of poverty, but that minimum standard is not high. It's only $22,000 a year for a single person in Canada. This level of income on its own does not actually give seniors the kind of lives that they want. So if we want to rise above that level, we actually need some form of private savings, which leads me to the next slide, which is on private savings. So this is not a great news story. The problem is low to moderate income Canadians actually don't have much in the way of savings. You can see the median retirement assets of a family's age 55 to 64, earning less than $25,000 a year without a workplace retirement plan is zero. The median retirement income, see a similar group between $25,000 and $50,000 a year is $250. That is a total number. That's not monthly. That is total savings. So effectively, this group is reliant on government programs for 100%, arguably, of their income once they stop working. And I would say that we believe that this is unacceptable. And we're committed to finding an efficient and effective ways for modest earners to save more for retirement. Now, before we talk about how we're working to solve this problem, we need to understand two things about Canada. So first is around investment fees. So in the spirit of being slightly interactive, because it's a little bit late in the afternoon, I wanted to ask you, how many of you think that our investment fees are higher? In Canada.
In Canada.
How many do you think are okay? Lower? Is the remainder, presumably? Well, let me show you something that you might find slightly shocking, which is they're a bit higher. We actually have the highest investment fees in the world, which is, arguably we win. Obviously we lose because this is an outrageous score to get, in a way. I mean, we are actually the last among 25 countries surveyed. So our average mutual fund fees, according to the industry's own lobby group, are 2.2%, which I think is about double what Americans pay. The net result of all of that is, as you can see, and I guess many of you probably would be familiar with this math, is that people with these kinds of fees effectively lose 40% of their nest egg to fees alone. Now, the other problem that we have is something called we call the GIS clawback. Now, GIS, I talked a little bit about that before, is actually not a small program. About a third of Canadians actually rely on GIS. And while we're good basically at setting a minimum floor in Canada, this is quite a significant problem in terms of the capacity of Canadians to actually save. So just to give you a more concrete example, we have a system that takes back 50% or more of whatever a lower income Canadian has in a typical retirement account. So if a lower income Canadian had, just to give you simple math, $50,000 in our equivalent of an IRA or a 401k, they would effectively lose $25,000 of that amount in lost guaranteed income supplement benefits. So I would say that our government is creating, in a way, a regressive welfare wall around retirement savings. So it's an example of a very worthwhile program working against the ability of this income group to build assets for retirement. And again, I would say that this is wrong. This is a group that cannot afford to lose their savings, nor do they deserve to. And in case you think that we focused on the worst case scenario here, when you do the math, and we've done quite a lot of math as part of what we do, you'll find that low to moderate income Canadians, even if they save diligently, and they save with reasonable asset allocation, that and investment products that are well thought out, they will, and by the way, that is actually something that doesn't occur in real life for the most part, that they will find at the end of 30 plus years that they have 75 cents back for every dollar that they invest. So that is is not great. It's a combination, we get those numbers effectively through a combination of the GIS clawback that I talked about and the higher fees. So the next slide is about how widespread basically is this problem in Canada? This problem effectively exists across virtually every one of our traditional, we call it regulatory categories. RSPs are a very common category. PRPPs are a newer category. I mean, obviously, I don't have time to get into these categories very much. Part of what I've highlighted here is that there are issues around what we call GIS benefit optimization, which is another way of saying that they're all effectively subject to the clawback apart from the TFSA. But we have issues, obviously, of high fees, and then we also have issues across many of these arrangements of not having a proper governance structure or fiduciary duty to members. So I want to turn for a second now to myths. The conventional wisdom around this stuff for modest and lower income earners is that actually lower and moderate income earners do not want to save. They don't really need to save because government benefits meet their needs and they can't or won't save. And what I would say is it turns out the conventional wisdom is wrong. I mean, the work that we've done with SEIU. SEIU is a major healthcare union in Canada. They've got 60,000 or so members, 30,000 of which actually have no retirement security. They are one of the largest, fastest growing unions in Canada, and their members are typically female, first-generation immigrants. In the work that we did with them, they're very hardworking people. They want to save. They were eager to save. They have high anxiety, about their futures, and they also want their union to help them. The broader polling, and that's done, I mean, you'll see some polling here on the screen, done recently in Canada, shows that this income group as well is willing to contribute. The majority of this income group is willing to contribute 10% of their pay to maintain their living standard in retirement. The data from Vanguard, again, in the U.S. context, supports that same conclusion. So how is I mean, you're probably more interested in the innovation that we've brought to this than some of this material, but how is what we're doing at Commonwealth new and unique? So we designed a product that will deliver something that avoids the two key problems I identified: high fees and the GIS clawback. And we've added some additional protections and innovations which we think are important to give people the best result, which we measure in a very simple way, which is around the optimization of the dollar. So what do you get effectively for every dollar that you invest? What do you get back for every dollar that you invest? And our result in the plan that we designed with SEIU, the result is expected to be 3 to 4 times better than a typical retirement security arrangement in Canada, or typical kind of retail retirement security arrangement in Canada. Now, we were driven to create this product and products like it, not only because there is a need in the market to be filled, but also because we believe from a policy perspective, there is an imperative to support low and moderate income Canadians in savings such that they can actually live out their retirement in dignity with an acceptable standard of living and not in effective poverty. And I would say this is good for individuals, and I would also say it's good for Canada. So this is our bit of our case study. It illustrates, again, the math. I mean, you can see effectively in these two scenarios that Amy is doing quite a bit better than Frank. And Amy is effectively winding up with much more, and you can see effectively where those losses occur between these two examples. So I referred before to the tax-free savings account in an earlier slide, and that's effectively the regulatory category that we used for our product. This is a regulatory category that was introduced about 8 years ago, and it was intended to allow lower-income Canadians to save efficiently for retirement. But to date, it hasn't been used for that purpose. Those of you who understand the incentives of some financial services firms may be able to guess why, but not going to go there. So My65 Plus, which is the product that we designed with SEIU, combines the principles upon which our better pension plans are built with that TFSA regulatory category. And you will have heard some of those principles come out in the preceding panel. We've brought proper governance to this plan. We've brought thoughtful, low-cost investment product to this plan by partnering with Vanguard, which is offering its target date fund at about 10% of the cost of a typical mutual fund in Canada. And we've brought true portability to that plan. What I mean by that is that we're allowing members to access this product through their bank account. And that allows them to move effectively from job to job. It's not then effectively employer-based entirely. And so we assume that people stay within that sector, but they can continue to contribute if they want to continue to contribute to build their retirement savings. And of course, SEIU has sponsored this plan to bring this innovation to their members. So I just want to make one final point, which is that we believe when organizations like SEIU, who care about their members and have their best interest at the core of what they do, are put in the position with the right information and the right design to hold service providers to account, that they will, and that the result is actually much, much better for members. And that's actually what our better pension plans do. And you will have heard earlier how well that actually works. I mean, in the last panel, people talked about, there's a bit of a passing reference to incentives, but that is something that we think is actually possible for other kinds of arrangements. And we believe that everyone actually can do this. Our design and approach enables that, and the evidence shows that members' outcomes are much better when actually things are arranged in this way. Now, this may not sound radical, but actually there is virtually no arrangement in the private savings market that does this. And we think it's the right thing to do, and we believe that ultimately it will make all the difference to do things this way. And it's one example of what we at Commonwealth are doing to try and improve the market, and we certainly feel that the time is ripe for this kind of innovation. And we certainly believe that doing it this way brings enormous value to people who can benefit from these kinds of arrangements. So those are my remarks, and I think we're going to
we'll
kick it
come
off
back
from
around
here.
and talk about it in the context of some of the other things we'll unpack there. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Catherine, let's go ahead and come to you and do a little bit of sizing up what the financial security for older Americans looks like in the U.S. And I think there's some different kinds of innovations that you would add on to the types of things that Jonathan was talking about. But it does strike me that the earlier metaphor that you used, Jason, was that the three-legged stool has become more of a pogo stick. And my sense for low and moderate income is it's a pogo stick in the mud. So it's not even particularly helpful as a balancing act. But I think that sounds very true, actually, in Canada and the U.S. But why don't you go ahead and kick us off, Catherine, with a little bit of a contextualizing.
Sure. Thank you, Ida, and thanks to the Retirement Security Project for hosting this event. And I think for many of us, the overview that you gave of the experience of low and moderate income workers is familiar. There's not major differences in terms of the struggles and the structural drivers of disparities between low and moderate income people and wealthy Americans as there are in Canada. But what we're learning is that the retirement system that we have in place here in the U.S., not only does it not serve low and moderate income people very well, but part of the reason it doesn't do so is because we keep looking at it in isolation, and we're failing to address savings writ large and financial security holistically in this country. I personally am optimistic from what I see in the private sector, some of the innovation that we see going on in financial technology, and in some of the thinking around solutions to improve the savings rates and the financial lives of low and moderate income Americans. Specifically, we'll get to a couple of those innovations, but specifically just applying a holistic lens, a lifetime lens, looking at short-term savings as well as retirement savings. Short-term savings in competition with or in context with retirement savings is progress. And that conversation is happening at AARP, which is traditionally seen as an older Americans organization, which is very encouraging to those of us in the field, because the retirement folks are talking to the asset building folks, and there's progress being made. That said, the status quo is, as you said, unacceptable here in the United States. The Social Security system provides the vast majority of retirement income for a large segment of our older American workforce. It needs to be strengthened. It needs to be shored up. And benefits for lower income workers do need to be strengthened. Access to workplace savings, which is the other way that people build retirement savings. The entire 401k system that we're familiar with misses about half of the workforce. Nearly half of American workers don't have access to any form of employer-sponsored retirement savings plan. It's about 55 million people. And one of the consequences of this is, of course, that American workers, especially low and moderate income workers, are unprepared for financial security in retirement. Depending on who you're listening to and which analysis you're looking at, the plight of the worker or the scope of the crisis varies. But in terms of the retirement savings, just to give out some numbers from the National Institute for Retirement Security, median household retirement savings for those who have any savings at all is $2,500. And for those nearer to retirement, it's about $15,000. Women, low-income people, communities of color have a fraction of this retirement wealth, which should be concerning for all of us, given the demographic change in our country, in the United States, which will be predominantly people of color by mid-century. As one of the solutions, there's a talk of working longer, of raising the retirement age. I think when we're thinking about low and moderate income workers, you've got to understand that that's not possible for a lot of people, especially with the kinds of jobs that lower wage workers have. Physically demanding work, long hours, multiple jobs, multiple responsibilities, as well as family caregiving responsibilities that extend beyond childcare, often in multi-generational households, immigrant households, et cetera. So working longer, while it's possible for some people, is not the solution for financial security for everyone. But increasingly, we're understanding that one of the threats to retirement security in this country is actually a lack of savings for the short term. So people don't have a cushion just to be able to cover an unexpected expense. And really the leaders in uncovering this lack of emergency savings has been the Pew Charitable Trusts, as well as some qualitative ethnographic research from a couple of scholars who wrote a book called The U.S. Financial Diaries, which if you're not familiar with it, you should check out. But the bottom line is that a typical financial emergency, an unexpected, unbudgeted for event faced by American families in this country is about $2,000 a year. That's a typical, most expensive financial shock, according to a Pew survey. And 41% of American households cannot afford to cover that shock. And that should be disturbing to us. That shows the vulnerability and how close to the edge not just low and moderate income households are, but a large swath of the American public. So what are these shocks? We're not talking about a hurricane. We're talking about a car repair. That's the number one most common shock. A pay cut or a job loss, followed by hospitalization, house repair, divorce, or separation. And these are Pew's data. For low and moderate income households, a financial shock can turn into an emergency really quickly and can last for a long time. The consequences are that people turn to high-cost debt products like payday loans, title loans, borrowing from family and friends. And there's other insidious and less quantitative results effects as well, in that first-generation college students who come from poorer backgrounds often become the lender of first resort for family members when they hit that financial shock. So you have racial and ethnic and income wealth inequalities perpetuated because of this lack of emergency savings. For those workers who are fortunate enough to actually have private retirement savings, financial shocks are part of the driver of what we call retirement account leakage. And what we're learning is about 40 cents of every dollar contributed to the 401k and IRA system is actually lost to leakage. This isn't loans against retirement accounts. This is withdrawals against retirement accounts before retirement. And Transamerica found that about a third of people are taking money from their retirement accounts to pay for unplanned expenses. So that's kind of the prognosis that we're looking at now. We can talk a little bit more about the product and policy innovations after Mark lays out his reading of HR 1, as well as all of the work that's going on at the state level. I'll stop there for now.
That's great. Are you calling Mark out? I mean, it's not double task, it's not multitasking up here. This is all related. It's all related work. It's really it struck me that your data on $250, $0 or $250 is very resonant with what you're saying as well, Catherine. And other 46% of Americans couldn't find $400, so a lot of similar pain points. And another one that you've identified, Catherine, and what you just said is that in addition to the kind of fees and potential clawback issues that I think we have similar types of issues here in different contexts, the leakage, because we have probably the most liquid retirement system in the world, is that we also are, because of the current conditions of income, also dealing with leakage from retirement system in a third way, perhaps, in the U.S. to bring into the specials. So luckily, there are people like Mark Avery in the world and David John, who long ago, when this retirement security project first started, really conceptualized in some ways a much more systemic way to both capture the number of low-income savers in this country who don't have access. So it's really looked at the access problem, began to look at the adequacy problem and kind of the design features that would have to go into that. So, in that sense, Mark, I'd love to turn it over to you to both respond a little bit to Jonathan and to lay out a little bit of kind of what in a U.S. context would work for low and moderate income Americans.
Thanks, Ida, and it's great to be here. I think Jonathan makes great points. And I'd like to agree and come back if we might during our discussion and tie those together. And I think Catherine makes great points too. And I would note again that David John and I, together with David Lapson, Bridget Madrian, John Bashirs, James Choi, are working on that issue with Catherine's help and Sarah Holmes' help to try to flesh out how short-term saving, emergency, rainy day saving, if you will, might be added to our system to augment retirement saving in a way that enhances both, stems leakage in the retirement system and fills this big gap that you've been talking about for particularly lower and moderate income people, just not having enough for short-term emergencies. At this time, the efforts in our private pension system to promote more retirement security for lower and moderate income people, middle class, lower middle class, working class, and lower income people, include, as Jonathan says, first and foremost, the concept that folks can save who are in these situations and want to save if given an easy and reasonably remunerative way to do it. So making it easy and convenient and making it reasonably remunerative, giving them some return, if you will, for what they put in, is part of the overall strategy that the Retirement Security Project sponsoring this program has been all about now for some years. Let me mention a half dozen specific things, one of which is the short-term emergency saving effort that's sort of in its infancy and that we're hoping will mature. The other five automatic enrollment in IRAs to cause a breakthrough in coverage of retirement savings for lower and moderate income and middle class workers in America, maybe as many as 40, 50 million people getting into the system for the first time. Number two, expanding the savers credit. So if auto IRA is making saving easier, more convenient, savers credit is making it more remunerative. This is the tax credit we now have that gives lower and moderate income people whose family income is in the lower 60,000s or below, a tax credit that levels the playing field, pardon the cliche, but I use it advisedly because it's what the high-end lobbyists are always telling Congress is why they need to complicate the tax code to put in more tax breaks for big companies and wealthy individuals. So for once, we could level the playing field in favor of middle class and lower than middle class people by giving them a tax credit if they save in an IRA, if they save in a 401k or similar plan. In addition to the deduction that they would normally get, which is proportional to their tax bracket, a tax credit that's proportional not to how much they make or earn generally, but to how much they save. And David, John, and I have developed together the first of these two proposals, the automatic IRA, and we and Bill Gale have worked on expanding the savers credit together with some of the rest of you in this room. The type of expansion, a 50% credit across the board, make it refundable, deposit the credit in the person's account so they're saving the credit as well as what they put in, and extending it to more of the middle class. Third, automatic enrollment in 401k, other auto features, escalate the 401k contributions. This helps middle and lower middle and moderate and lower income people if they have access to a 401k. If they're eligible, it jacks up participation dramatically, especially among lower income and minority folks, sometimes from 1 out of 5 to 4 out of 5 in terms of those who participate in the plan if given the chance. Fourth, lifetime income, getting our private pension system to restore the pension part of the private pension system, the regular systematic guaranteed lifetime income, which defined benefit plans provide when people don't elect lump sums and which 401ks generally don't provide. We can get lifetime income into 401ks, into IRAs with much greater frequency and help enhance security a great deal. Fifth, the MyRA, may it rest in peace. This was a proposal that we implemented. It's an administrative initiative in the previous administration, also directed at lower and moderate income people to give them a really easy way to save through IRAs. Not the big solution that the automatic IRA would be, but a kind of supplement or helper to those who are risk averse, don't want to get into the market, afraid to save, never saved before, giving them a way pending a major solution like automatic enrollment in IRAs, a short-term help. And given the opportunity in tax reform, now on the table on the Hill, to finally implement reforms to really help the middle class and boost the economy, which of these has Congress chosen to move forward with? None. Rothification, a gimmick to pretend to be paying for some of the tax reform without really doing so. Maybe it was inevitable that this would be attempted after some in prominent positions have irresponsibly invented and experimented with the concept of fake broadcast news, fake print media news, fake online news. Their political allies have recently been trying out the concept of fake revenues. I'm referring to the claim that if you shift from pre-tax savings which gives a tax benefit in the short term, to post-tax savings Roth type, which gives a tax benefit in the long term, that you've actually saved all this revenue for the federal government rather than merely shifted the timing of the revenue.
Mark, it was worth it for everybody in this room to stay here just to hear that, I think, you know.
It's a good line.
I just read through some of the tax reform bill, and, you know, as people know from news reports, if you've followed it today, they're saying that there's no Rothification in there. I wish I'd been able to be at the previous panel because I was really interested in what people had to say, the panelists had to say, but I skipped it. Sorry, Josh. I skipped it in order to read the tax bill because I knew that you would ask me.
I'm going to ask you about it, yeah.
About it. So it's 400 and some pages. It took me about 15 minutes to look to do what I needed to do, which was find out what you'd want to know, you know, look at the Rothification provisions. So it took the first minute to see that there was nothing on Rothification in there and nothing on 401ks. The other 14 minutes I spent being skeptical about that, whether in fact it'll come back in. You know, there's a legislative process ahead of us. There's a markup. There's a House vote. I think it's less likely that the Senate would add this, but the House could still do it. And the revenue target is, the fake revenue target is very tempting. They could raise $4, $5, $6, $7, maybe $800 billion with this kind of Rothification. So the Democrats, lest this sound partisan at all, which it's not, the Senate Democrats came out with an attack on Rothification, as most of you know, on Tuesday. And they announced that there was an antidote to this. They exposed it as the gimmick that it is. But they could not resist the temptation to compromise between a solid proposal that would actually help the middle class, and that's the good news here, that they put the automatic IRA out there and said that should be done, and also something useful on employer contributions. But on the other hand, they yielded to the temptation to make a sort of score political points by saying that the first of the three antidotes or replacements of Rothification ought to be raising the maximum limits on 401k plans by a third. Is the real problem for middle-class 50-year-old workers in our country that they cannot contribute more than $24,000 a year to their 401k, which, by the way, is 40% of the median income in America? Or is the problem that a third to a half of them don't have a 401k or a pension plan? The auto IRA would address the latter, would at least give them something 401k-like, putting people into tax-favored saving through automatic enrollment without requiring small businesses to sponsor a plan and giving a tax credit to the small business for its trouble, even though there's no outlay, no contribution that it would need to make. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, but I wanted to give you that just quick breaking news bulletin on the tax bill and the response to it.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the discussion too, and I actually don't know how much of it we can have because my notes say that we're supposed to wrap up at 4:25. And everybody else went over, so.
Go for a couple minutes.
So I do think that at the very least, we should have the ability to have the conversation up here, and would love to hear some of those questions, but perhaps we'll have to take them offline a little bit. I think the first thing to all of you is you unpacked one kind of assumption pretty explicitly, but all three of you did, which is that low and moderate income people can't save or won't save, or that the desire to do so isn't there. So I think that kind of assumption we've already talked about, addressed, and the evidence base is not there for that work.
Right.
But the other kind of assumption is that we have certain institutions that have to play certain roles in reform, and some of them aren't doing that right now. So I wonder if the other question is, who are the innovators, and who can be the institutions of the future who help to bring some of these changes to pass? And I know, Jonathan, for you, you've got a few thoughts about that with the SEIU.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of other associations, other kinds of intermediaries,
Right.
is there a future type of institutional, function that we need to be thinking about to solve these
Yeah,
problems?
but I think our view is that the power of the group and the power of associations and unions is an untapped power in a way, and that part of what we've done with SEIU in Canada is to tap that power more for members of their community who don't have traditional kind of pension or other kind of workplace coverage. And so they've been able, in a way, to innovate, and they're not committed to the traditional forms of kind of defined benefit type arrangements for this group, and they're willing to step up and to create effectively a plan that is helping their members in that way. I think our view is that kind of approach can be extended across many groups who actually have the members' best interest at heart. And that's a little bit different in terms of the incentives than traditionally financial services firms in the way they interact with, say, clients. There's a lot of value, I think, to be derived from groups sponsoring things, from those groups being empowered with the right information, and knowing what we do about what actually makes, say, better pension arrangements work, that many of those principles can be applied to the way in which those arrangements are organized and managed.
There's a parallel to that in the U.S., not only for thinking about those other, but also for leadership at the state level. So I just wonder, Mark and Catherine, if you want to say something about that as an additional form of leadership, an institution that could help to drive some of this change in the absence of federal leadership.
Certainly, I think one of the takeaways of the tax reform proposal is that Congress doesn't have retirement reform at the top of its list. To the extent retirement was included, even considered on the table, it was to raise revenue to pay for some of the other changes in the tax bill. So the national level, despite the fact that the American consumer has retirement security and anxiety about that at the top of their list, policymakers are not paying attention. At the state level, however, we do see leadership in about half the states or more at this point in taking some initiative to tackle the retirement savings gap in small businesses. Some have chosen the path of the automatic IRA. Others are looking at other models like multiple employer plans. This is real progress, and states can lead and are leading on these work and save efforts, as we call them, in AARP. One fundamental difference between the 401k and what's happening at the state level is the role of the employer, which is an institution I would call out as extremely important and vital to the future of retirement security in this country. There's a question about what responsibilities the employer will have in the future around economic security of their workers, around retirement provision. There's some who will say that the employers want to get out of the game altogether. But I would look to the buzz around employee financial wellness as one piece of evidence that maybe employers are still interested in doing right by their employees at the right price. And at the state level, these state plans, the employer's only responsibility in most of these cases is to facilitate a payroll deduction into a private retirement account in the name of that employee. And so employers still have a vital role to play, but the hurdles to offering a 401k plan, cost, administrative burden, are removed or significantly reduced in some of these cases. And so there are innovations that are happening that still include the employer, but really reimagine the role of the employer.
I'm sorry we won't have a fully robust discussion here, Mark. I want to give you a last word observation back to Jonathan in Canada, and also just in terms of this is not the first time we've come through this cycle of looking at opportunities in federal policy to address the needs of low and moderate income workers in the retirement system. But there's actually some things on the horizon to both continue to think about in terms of what other countries are doing and to continue to think about the U.S. opportunity. What's your advice going
Absolutely.
forward?
And Jonathan, you point out very well that we ought to be looking at who the players are, the institutions, and the state efforts to implement, in particular, the automatic IRA. And Josh Gottbaum here is the chairman of that effort in Maryland. Fortunately, Oregon, California, Illinois, Connecticut also have passed that legislation. It's taking the automatic IRA proposal that David, John, and I developed now 11 years ago and implementing it at the state level, which has taken years. We started working, at least I started working with the states on something like this 15 years ago, and when we developed the auto IRA, we were able to get them interested in it along the way. So in the U.S. at least, the states, as Catherine says, are a big plus. The other thing I would mention institutionally to close is that the reason Congress almost countered the Rothification impulse with raising the maximum limits on plans, which is helpful only to a very small percentage of savers, is that the role of the financial services industry has been very mixed. Many people there are really well-intentioned. They're all expert, generally expert. Many of them have their clients' best interests in mind, and many of them want to have clients who are not just affluent people. On the other hand, there's a general incentive for the industry to serve the most affluent, of course, to maximize profits. They have shareholders, it's a free market economy, and to resist regulation. And the result, to some degree, is that all of our conversations about retirement security are continually in need of refocus on who it's all about. It's not all about assets under management, which was the point of raising the limits, and frankly was a large part of the concern about Rothification, though not all of it. It's about retirement security for those who need it the most. So the focus all too often is on the providers, on the plan sponsors who are great and who are doing what's needed, but not enough on the central player in our system, the worker.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much to all of you, and thanks again to the Brookings Institution for organizing this panel. And I'm sorry, audience, we'll talk in the end. Thanks.
Yeah.
And as you can tell, this is a conversation that could go on for quite some time, so regard this as the start of a longer conversation. Thank you all for coming and for sticking with us, and thank you for everyone who is watching us on the web. Thanks.